So we are on chapter 14, which is the madness of life. And I'm going to do a few things and then I'm going to get started here. All right. Chapter 14, the madness of life. It was dark when Eragon jolted upright in bed, breathing hard. The room was chilly. Goosebumps formed on his arms and shoulders. It was a few hours before dawn, the time when nothing moves and light waits for the first warm touches of sunshine. His heart pounded as terrible premonition gripped him. It felt like a shroud lay over the world, and its darkest corner was over his room. He quietly got out of bed and dressed. With apprehension, he hurried down the hallway. Alarm shot through him when he saw the door to Garrow's room open and people clustered inside. Garrow lay peacefully on the bed. He was dressed in clean clothes. His hair had been combed back and his face was calm. He might have been sleeping if not for the silver amulet clasped around his neck and the sprig of dried hemlock on his chest, the last gifts from the living to the dead. Katrina stood next to the bed, face pale and eyes downcast. He heard her whisper, "I had hoped to call him father one day." Call him father, he thought bitterly, a right even I don't have. He felt like a ghost, drained of all vitality. Everything was insubstantial except for Garrow's face. Tears flooded Eragon's cheeks. He stood there, shoulders shaking, but did not cry out. Mother, aunt, uncle, he had lost them all. The weight of his grief was crushing, a monstrous force that left him tottering. Someone led him back to his room, uttering consolations. He fell on the bed, wrapped his arms around his head, and sobbed convulsively. He felt Saphira contact him, but he pushed her aside and let himself be swept away by sorrow. He could not accept that Garrow was gone. If he did, what was left to believe in? Only a merciless, uncaring world that snuffed lives like candles before a wind. Frustrated and terrified, he turned his tear-dampened face towards the heavens and shouted, "What god would do this? Show yourself!" He heard people running to his room, but no answer came from above. He didn't deserve this. Comforting hands touched him, and he was aware of Elaine sitting next to him. She held him as he cried, and eventually, exhausted, he slipped unwillingly into sleep. Chapter 15, A Rider's Blade. Let me just fix this real quick because I didn't realize I still had the music on. All right, Chapter 15, A Rider's Blade. Anguish enveloped Eragon as he awoke. Though he kept his eyes closed, they could not stop a fresh flow of tears. He searched for some idea or hope to help him keep his sanity. "I can't live with this," he moaned. "Then don't." Saphira's words reverberated in his head. "How? Garrow is gone forever. And in time I must meet the same fate. Love, family, accomplishments, they're all torn away, leaving nothing. What is the worth of anything we do?" "There is worth in the act. Your worth halts when you surrender the will to change and experience life. But options are before you. Choose one and dedicate yourself to it. The deeds will give you new hope and purpose." "But what can I do?" "The only true guide is your heart. Nothing less than its supreme desire can help you." She left him to ponder her statements. Eragon examined his emotions. It surprised him that, more than grief, he found a searing anger. "What you want me to do? Pursue the strangers?" "Yes." Her frank answer confused him. He took a deep breath, trembling breath. Why? Remember what you said in the spine? How you reminded me of my duty as a dragon, and I returned you despite the urging of my instinct? So you too must control yourself. I thought long and deep the past few days, and I realized what it means to be a dragon and rider. It is our destiny to attempt the impossible, to accomplish great deeds regardless of fear. It is our responsibility to the future. I don't care what you say. Those aren't reasons to live, cried Eragon. Then hear the others. My tracks have been seen. The people are alert to my presence. Eventually, I will be exposed. Besides, there is nothing here for you. No farm, no family, and Roran's not dead, he said vehemently. But if you stay, you'll have to explain what really happened. He has a right to know why his father died. What might he do once he knows of me? Saphira's arguments whirled around in Eragon's head, but he shrank from the idea of forsaking Palancar Valley. It was his home. Yet the thought of enacting vengeance on the strangers was fiercely comforting. Am I strong enough for this? You have me. Doubt besieged him. It would be such a wild, desperate thing to do. Contempt for his indecision rose, and a harsh smile danced on his lips. Saphira was right. Nothing mattered anymore except the act itself. The doing is the thing. And what would give him more satisfaction than hunting down the strangers? A terrible energy and strength began to grow in him. It grabbed his emotions and forged them into a solid bar of anger, with one word stamped on it: revenge. His head pounded as he said it with conviction. I will do it. He severed the contact with Saphira and rolled out of bed, his body tense like a coiled spring. It was still early morning. He had only slept a few hours. Nothing is more dangerous than an enemy with nothing to lose, he thought, which is what I have become. Yesterday he had difficulty walking upright, but now he moved confidently, held in place by his iron will. The pain his body sent him was defied and ignored. As he crept out of the house, he heard a murmur of two people talking. Curious, he stopped and listened. Elaine was saying in her gentle voice, "Place to stay. We have a room." Horace answered inaudibly in his brass rumble, "Yes, the poor boy." This time, Eragon could hear Horse's response. "Maybe." There was a long pause. "I've been thinking about what Eragon said, and I'm not sure he told us everything." "What do you mean?" asked Elaine. There was concern in her voice. When we started for their farm, the road was scraped smooth by a board he dragged Garrow on. Then we reached a place where the snow was all trampled and turned up. His footprints and signs of the board stopped there, but we also saw the same giant tracks from the farm. And what about his legs? I can't believe he didn't notice losing that much skin. I didn't want to push him for answers earlier, but now I think I will." "Maybe what he saw scared him so much that he doesn't want to talk about it," suggested Elaine. "You saw how distraught he was." "That still doesn't explain how he managed to get Garrow nearly all the way here without leaving any tracks." Saphira was right, thought Eragon. It's time to leave. Too many questions from too many people. Sooner or later they'll find answers. He continued through the house, tensing whenever the floor creaked. The streets were clear. Few people were up at this time of day. He stopped for a minute and forced himself to focus. I don't need a horse. Saphira will be my steed, but she needs a saddle. She can hunt for the both of us, so I don't have to worry about food, though I should get some anyway. Whatever else I need, I can find buried in her house. He went to Gedrick's tanning vats on the outskirts of Carvajal. The vile smell made him cringe, but he kept moving, headed for the shack set into the side of the hill where the cured hides were stored. He cut down 3 large ox hides from the rows of skin hanging from the ceiling. The thievery made him feel guilty, but he reasoned, "It's not really stealing. I'll pay Gedrick back someday, along with Horst." He rolled up the thick leather and took it to the stand of trees away from the village. He wedged the hides between the branches of a tree, then returned to Carvajal. Now for food. He went to the tavern, intending to get it there, but he smiled tightly in reverse direction. If he was going to steal, it might as well be from Sloane. He sneaked up to the butcher's house. The front door was barred whenever Sloane was not there, but the side door was secured only with a thin chain, which he broke easily. The rooms inside were dark. He fumbled blindly until his hands came upon hard piles of meat wrapped in cloth. He stuffed as many of them as he could under his shirt, then hurried back to the street and furtively closed the door. A woman shouted his name nearby. He clasped the bottom of his shirt to keep the meat from falling out, and ducked behind a corner. He shivered as Horst walked between two houses not 10 feet away. Eragon ran as soon as Horst was out of sight. His legs burned as he pounded down the alley and back to the trees. He slipped between the tree trunks and turned to see if he was being pursued. No one was there. Relieved, he let out his breath and reached into the tree for the leather. It was gone. Going somewhere? Eragon whirled around. Brom scowled angrily at him. An ugly wound on the side of his head. A short sword hung at his belt in a brown sheath. The hides were in his hands. Eragon's eyes narrowed in irritation. How did that old man manage to sneak up on him? Everything had been so quiet. He would have sworn that no one was around. Give them back, he snapped. Why? So you can run off before Garrow is even buried? The accusation was sharp. It's none of your business, he barked, temper flashing. Why did you follow me? I didn't, grunted Brom. I've been waiting for you here. Now where are you going? Nowhere. Eragon lunged for the skins and grabbed them from Brom's hands. Brom did nothing to stop him. I hope you have enough meat to feed your dragon. Eragon froze. What are you talking about? Brom crossed his arms. Don't fool with me. I know where the mark on your hand, the the Gedway Ignazia, the shining palm, comes from. You have touched a dragon hatchling. I know why you came to me with those questions, and I know that once more the riders live. Eragon dropped the leather and meat. It's finally happened. I have to get away. I can't run faster than him with my injured legs, but if Saphira, he called. For a few agonizing seconds, she did not answer. But then, yes. We've been discovered. I need you. He sent her a picture of where he was, and she took off immediately. Now he just had to stall Brom. How did you find out? He asked in a hollow voice. Brom stared into the distance and moved his lips soundlessly as if he were talking to someone else. Then he said, There were clues and hints everywhere. I had only pay attention. Anyone with the right knowledge could have done the same. Tell me, how is your dragon? She, said Eragon, is fine. If we weren't at the farm when the strangers came. Ah, your legs. You are flying? How did Brom figure that out? What if the strangers coerced him into doing this? Maybe they want him to discover where I'm going so they can ambush us. And where's Saphira? He reached out with his mind and found her circling far underhead. Come! No, I will watch for a time. Why? Because of the slaughter at Doru Aruben. What? Brom leaned against a tree with a slight smile. I have talked with her, and she has agreed to stay above until we settle our differences. As you can see, you really don't have any choice but to answer my questions. Now tell me, where are you going? Bewildered, Eragon put a hand to his temple. How could Brom speak to Saphira? The back of his head throbbed and ideas whirled through his mind, but he kept reaching the same conclusion. He had to tell the old man something. He said, I was going to find a safe place to hide while I heal. And after that? The question could not be ignored. The throbbing in his head grew worse, and it was impossible to think. Nothing seemed clear anymore. All he wanted to do was to tell someone about the events of the past few months. It tore at him that his secret had caused Garrow's death. He gave up and tremulously said, I was going to hunt down the strangers and kill them. A mighty task for one so young, Brom said in a normal tone, as if Eragon had proposed the most obvious and suitable thing to do. Certainly a worthy endeavor, and one you are fit to carry out. Yet it strikes me that help would not be unwelcome. He reached behind a bush and pulled out a large pack. His tone became gruff. Anyway, I'm not going to stay behind while some stripling gets to run around with a dragon. Is he really offering to help, or is it a trap? Eragon was afraid of what his mysterious enemies could do. But Brahm convinced Saphira to trust him, and they've talked through the mind touch. If she isn't worried, he decided to put his suspicions aside for the present. I don't need help, said Eragon, then grudgingly added, but you can come. Then we best be going, said Brahm, his face blanketed for a moment. I think you'll find that your dragon will listen to you again. Saphira? Asked Eragon. Yes. He resisted the urge to question her. Will you meet us at the farm? Yes. So you reached an agreement? I guess so. She broke contact and soared away. He glanced at Carvajal and saw people running from house to house. I think they're looking for me. Brahm raised an eyebrow. Probably. Shall we go? Eragon hesitated. I'd like to leave a message for Roran. It doesn't seem right to run off without telling him why. It's been taken care of, assured Brahm. I left a letter for him with Gertrude, explaining a few things. I cautioned him to be on guard for certain dangers. Is that satisfactory? Eragon nodded. He wrapped a leather around the meat and started off. They were careful to stay out of sight until they reached the road, then quickened their pace, eager to distance themselves from Carvajal. Eragon plowed ahead, determinedly, his legs burning. The mindless rhythm of walking freed his mind to think. Once we get home, I won't travel any further with Brahm until I get some answers, he told himself firmly. I hope he can tell me more about the riders and whom I'm fighting. As the wreckage of the farm came into view, Brahm's eyebrows beetled with anger. Eragon was dismayed to see how swiftly nature was reclaiming the farm. Snow and dirt were already piled inside the house, concealing the violence of the stranger's attack. All that remained of the barn was a rapidly eroding rectangle of soot. Brahm's head snapped up at the sound of Saphira's wings drifted over the trees. She dived past them from behind, almost brushing their heads. They staggered as a wall of air buffeted them. Saphira's scales glittered as she wheeled over the farm and landed gracefully. Brahm stepped forward with an expression of both solemn and joyous. His eyes were shining. A tear shone on his cheek before it disappeared into his beard. He stood there for a long while, breathing heavily as he watched Saphira and she him. Eragon heard him muttering and edged closer to listen. So it starts again. But how and where will it end? My sight is veiled. I cannot tell if this be tragedy or farce, for the elements are both here. However it may be, my station is unchanged. And I, whatever else he might have said, was faded away as Saphira proudly approached them. Eragon passed Brahm, pretended he had heard nothing, and greeted her. There was something different between them now, as if they knew each other even more intimately, yet were still strangers. He rubbed her neck, and his palm tingled as their minds touched. A strong curiosity came from her. I've seen no humans except you and Garrow, and he was badly injured, she said. You viewed people through my eyes. It's not the same. She came closer and turned her long head so that she could inspect Brahm with one large blue eye. You really are queer creatures, she said critically, and continued to stare at him. Brahm held still as she sniffed the air, and then he extended a hand to her. Saphira slowly bowed her head and allowed him to touch her on the brow. With a snort, she jerked back and retreated behind Eragon. Her tail flicked over the ground. What is it? He asked. She did not answer. Brahm turned to him and asked in an undertone, What's her name? Saphira. A particular expression crossed Brahm's face. He ground the butt of his staff into the earth with such force his knuckles turned white. Of all the names you gave me, it was the only one she liked. If I think it fits, Eragon added quickly. Fit it does, said Brahm. There was something in his voice Eragon could not identify. Was it loss, wonder, fear, envy? He was not sure. It could have been none of them or all. Brahm raised his voice and said, Greetings, Saphira. I am honored to meet you. He twisted his hand in a strange gesture and bowed. I like him, said Saphira quietly. Of course you do. Everyone enjoys flattery. Eragon touched her on the shoulder and went to the ruined house. Saphira trailed behind with Brahm. The old man looked vibrant and alive. Eragon climbed into the house and crawled under the door into what was left of his room. He barely recognized it under piles of shattered wood. Guided by memory, he searched where the inside wall had been and found his empty pack. Part of the frame was broken, but the damage could easily be repaired. He kept rummaging and eventually uncovered the end of his bow, which was still in its buckskin tube. Though the leather was scratched and scuffed, he was pleased to see that the oiled wood was unharmed. Finally, some luck. He strung the bow and pulled on the sinew experimentally. It bent smoothly without any snaps or creaks. Satisfied, he hunted for his quiver, which he found buried nearby. Many of the arrows were broken. He unstrung the bow and handed it and the quiver to Brom, who said, "It takes a strong arm to pull that." Eragon took the compliment silently. He picked through the rest of the house for other useful items and dumped the collection next to Brom. It was a meager pile. "What now?" asked Brom. His eyes were sharp and inquisitive. Eragon looked away. "We need to find a place to hide." "Do you have somewhere in mind?" "Yes." He wrapped all the supplies, except for his bow, into a tight bundle and tied it shut. Hefting it onto his back, he said, "This way," and headed into the forest. "Saphira, follow us in the air. Your footprints are too easily found and tracked." Very well. She took off behind them. Their destination was nearby, but Eragon took a circuitous route in an effort to baffle any pursuers. It was well over an hour before he finally stopped in a well-concealed bramble. The irregular clearing in the center was just large enough for a fire, 2 people, and a dragon. Red squirrels scampered into the trees, chattering in protest to their intrusion. Brom extricated himself from a vine and looked around with interest. "Does anyone else know of this?" he asked. "No. I found it when we first moved here. It took me a week to dig to the center, and another week to clear out all the dead wood." Saphira landed beside them and folded her wings, careful to avoid the thorns. She curled up, snapping twigs with her hard scales, and rested her head on the ground. Her unreadable eyes followed them closely. Brom leaned against his staff and fixed his gaze on her. His scrutiny made Eragon nervous. Eragon watched them until hunger forced him into action. He built a fire, filled a pot with snow, and then set it over the flames to melt. When the water was hot, he tore off chunks of meat and dropped them into the pot with a lump of salt. "Not much of a meal," he thought grimly, "but it'll do. I'll probably be eating this for some time to come, so I might as well get used to it." The stew simmered quietly, spreading a rich aroma through the clearing. The tip of Saphira's tongue snaked out and tasted the air. When the meat was tender, Brom came over and Eragon served the food. They ate quietly, avoiding each other's eyes. Afterward, Brom pulled out his pipe and lit it leisurely. "Why do you want to travel with me?" asked Eragon. A cloud of smoke left Brom's lips and spiraled up through the trees until it disappeared. "I have a vested interest in keeping you alive," he said. "What do you mean?" demanded Eragon. "To put it bluntly, I'm a storyteller, and I happen to think that you will make a fine story. You're the first rider to exist outside of the king's control for over 100 years. What will happen? Will you perish as a martyr? Will you join the Varden? Or will you kill King Kalbatorix? All fascinating questions, and I will be there to see every bit of it, no matter what I have to do." A knot formed in Eragon's stomach. He could not see himself doing any of those things, least of all becoming a martyr. "I want my vengeance, but for the rest, I have no ambition." "That may be, but tell me, how can you talk with Saphira?" Brom took his time, putting more tobacco into his pipe. Once it was relit and firmly in his mouth, he said, "Very well, if it's answers you want, it's answers you'll get, but they may not be to your liking." He got up, brought his pack over to the fire, and pulled out a long object wrapped in cloth. It was about 5 feet long, and, from the way he handled it, rather heavy. He peeled away the cloth, strip by strip, like a mummy being unswathed. Eragon gazed transfixed as a sword was revealed. The gold pommel was teardrop shape, with the sides cut away to reveal a ruby the size of a small egg. The hilt was wrapped in silver wire. burnished until it gleamed like starlight. The sheath was wine red and smooth as glass, adorned solemnly by a strange black symbol etched into it. Next to the sword was a leather belt with a heavy buckle. The last strip fell away, and Brahm passed the weapon to Eragon. The handle fit Eragon's hand as if it had been made for him. He slowly drew the sword. It slid soundlessly from the sheath. The flat blade was iridescent red and shimmered in the firelight. The keen edges curved gracefully to a sharp point. A duplicate of the black symbol was inscribed on the metal. The balance of the sword was perfect. It felt like an extension of his arm, unlike the rude farm tools he was used to. An air of power lay over it, as if an unstoppable force resided in its core. It had been created for violent convulsions of battle, to end men's lives, yet it held a terrible beauty. "This was once a rider's blade," said Brahm gravely. "When a rider finished his training, the elves would present him with a sword. Their methods of forging have always remained secret. However, their swords are eternally sharp and will never stain. The custom was to have a rider's blade color match that of the rider's dragon. But I think we can make an exception in this case. The sword is named Zarok. I don't know what it means, probably something personal to the rider who owned it." He watched Eragon swing the sword. "Where did you get it?" asked Eragon. He reluctantly slipped the blade back into the sheath and attempted to hand the sword back, but Brahm made no move to take it. "It doesn't matter," said Brahm. "I will only say that it took me a series of nasty and dangerous adventures to attain it. Consider it yours. You have more claim to it than I do, and before all this is done, I think you will need it." The offer caught Eragon off guard, as "It is a princely gift, thank you." Unsure of what else to say, he slid his hand down the sheath. "What is this symbol?" he asked. "That was the rider's personal crest." Eragon tried to interrupt, but Brahm glared at him until he was quiet. "Now, if you must know, anyone can learn how to speak to a dragon if they have the proper training, and," he raised his finger for some emphasis, "it doesn't mean anything if they can. I know more about dragons and their abilities than almost anyone else alive. On your own, it might take years to learn what I can teach you. I'm offering my knowledge as a shortcut. And for how I know so much, I will keep that to myself." Eragon pulled herself up as he finished speaking and prowled over to Eragon. He pulled out the blade and showed her the sword. "It has power," she said, touching the point with her nose. The metal's iridescent color rippled like water as it met her scales. She lifted her head with a satisfied snort, and the sword resumed its normal appearance. Eragon sheathed it, troubled. Brahm raised an eyebrow. "That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Dragons will constantly amaze you. Things happen around them. Mysterious things that aren't possible anywhere else. Even though the riders worked with dragons for centuries, they never completely understood their abilities. Some say that even the dragons don't know their full extent of their powers. They are linked with this land in a way that lets them overcome great obstacles. What Saphira did just illustrates my earlier point. There is much you don't know." There was a long pause. "That may be," said Eragon, "but I can learn. And the strangers are the most important thing I need to know about right now. Do you have any idea who they are?" Brahm took a deep breath. "They are called the Razak. No one knows if that's the name of their race or of what they have chosen to call themselves. Either way, if they have individual names, they keep them hidden. The Razak were never seen before Galbatorix came to power. He must have found them during his travels and enlisted them in his service. Little or nothing is known about them. However, I can tell you this. They aren't human. When I glimpsed one's head, it appeared to have something resembling a beak and black eyes as large as my fist. Though how they manage our speech is a mystery to me. Doubtless the rest of their bodies are just as twisted. That is why they cover themselves with cloaks at all times, regardless of the weather. As for their powers, they are stronger than a man and can jump incredible heights, but they cannot use magic. Be thankful for that, because if they could, you would already be in their grasp. I also know they have a strong aversion to the sunlight, though it won't stop them if they're determined. Don't make the mistake of underestimating a Razak, for they're cunning and full of guile. How many of them are there? Asked Eragon, wondering how Brom could possibly know so much. As far as I know, only the 2 you saw. There might be more, but I've never heard of them. Perhaps they're the last of a dying race. You see, they are the king's personal dragon hunters. Whenever rumors reach Galbatorix of a dragon in the land, he sends the Razak to investigate. A trail of death often follows them. Brom blew a series of smoke rings and watched them float up between the brambles. Eragon ignored the rings until he noticed that they were changing color and darting around. Brom winked slyly. Eragon was sure that no one had seen Saphira, so how could Galbatorix have heard about her? When he voiced his objections, Brom said, "You're right. It seems unlikely that anyone from Carvajal could have informed the king. Why don't you tell me where you got the egg and how you raised Saphira? That might clarify the issue." Eragon hesitated, then recounted all the events since when he had found the egg in the spine. It felt wonderful to finally confide in someone. Brom asked a few questions, but most of the time he listened intently. The sun was about to set when Eragon finished his tale. Both of them were quiet as the clouds turned a soft pink. Eragon eventually broke the silence. "I just wish I knew where she came from, and Saphira doesn't remember." Brom clocked his head. "I don't know. You've made many things clear to me. I'm sure no one besides us has seen Saphira. The Razak must have a source of information outside of this valley, one who's probably dead by now. You've had a hard time and done much. I'm impressed." Eragon stared blankly into the distance, then asked, "What happened to your head? It looks like you were hit with a rock." "No, but that's a good guess." He took a deep pull on the pipe. "I was sneaking around the Razak's camp after dark, trying to learn what I could, but they surprised me in the shadows. It was a good trap, but they underestimated me. I managed to drive them away. Not, however," he said wryly, "without this token of my stupidity. Stunned, I fell to the ground and didn't regain consciousness until the next day. But then they had already arrived at your farm. It was too late to stop them. But I set out after them anyway. That's when we met on the road." Who is he to think that he could take on the Razak alone? They ambushed him in the dark and he was only stunned? Unsettled, Eragon asked haughtily. "When you saw the mark, the Gedwe... this word... the Gedwe Ignazia on my palm, why didn't you tell me who the Razak were? I would have warned Garrow instead of going to Saphira first, and the 3 of us could have fled." Brom sighed. "I was unaware of what to do at the time. I thought I could keep the Razak away from you, and once they had left, confront you about Saphira. But they outsmarted me. It's a mistake that I deeply regret, and one that has cost you dearly." "Who are you?" demanded Eragon, suddenly bitter. "How come a mere village storyteller happens to have a rider's sword? How do you know about the Razak?" Brom tapped his pipe. "I thought I made it clear I wasn't going to talk about that." "My uncle is dead because of this. Dead!" exclaimed Eragon, slashing his hand through the air. "I've trusted you this far because Saphira respects you, but no more. You're not the person I've known in Carvajal for all these years. Explain yourself." For a long time, Brom stared at the smoke, swirling between them, deep lines creasing in his forehead. When he stirred, it was only to take another puff. Finally, he said, "You've probably never thought about it, but most of my life has been spent outside Palancar Valley. I was only in Carvajal that I took up the mantle of a storyteller, and I have played many roles to different people. I have a complicated past. It was partly through the desire to escape that I came here. So no, I'm not the man you think I am." "Ha!" snorted Eragon. "Then who are you?" Brom smiled gently. "I am the one who is here to help you. Do not scorn those words. They are the truest I've ever spoken. But I'm not going to answer your questions. At this point, you don't need to hear my history, nor have you earned that right. Yes, I have knowledge. Brom the storyteller wouldn't. But I'm more than he. You'll have to learn to live with the fact, and the fact that I don't hand out descriptions of my life to anyone who asks." Eragon glared at him sullenly. "I'm going to sleep," he said, leaving the fire. Brom did not seem surprised, but there was sorrow in his eyes. He spread his bedroll next to the fire as Eragon laid beside Saphira, and an icy silence fell over the camp. Next chapter is chapter 16, I think, saddle making, or 15. And I look forward to reading that at another date.